The 11th of June, 1944, Dordogne region, southwestern France. 5 days after the Allied landings in Normandy, resistance fighters strike at the railway station in the small town of Mussidan, destroying a German military train carrying supplies to the Normandy front. The fighting leaves 8 guerrillas dead, along with most of the German personnel guarding the train. News of the attack spreads quickly, and German forces prepare to respond. By afternoon, a convoy from the German 11th Panzer Division arrives from the city of Bordeaux. Resistance fighters withdraw into the countryside, but the town remains exposed. German forces and collaborators move through Mussidan with deliberate purpose, rounding up men over the age of 16 from their homes and workplaces. Fear grips the population as arrests mount and the streets fall silent as families wait behind shuttered windows, anticipating violence and death. German forces will then line up dozens of innocent civilians, among them the mayor of the town, and summarily execute them. This atrocity, committed by the Nazis and their collaborators against the local civilian population, becomes known as the Mussidan Massacre. However, this crime will not remain unpunished, and the perpetrators will pay for their crimes with their own lives. The Second World War began on the 1st of September 1939 with a German invasion of Poland. The German invasion of France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands started on the 10th of May 1940 and became known as the Battle of France. As part of the armistice agreement France signed with Germany on the 22nd of June 1940, France was divided into occupied and unoccupied zones. Germany occupied northern France and all of France's Atlantic coastline down to the border with Spain. A new French government was established in Vichy, in the unoccupied southern part of the country. The Vichy government declared neutrality, but it was bound by the armistice provisions to cooperate with Germany. The formation of the French resistance was a gradual process. However, as the German occupation authorities and the Vichy regime became increasingly brutal and intimidating, they inspired the formation of paramilitary groups dedicated to both active and passive resistance. In rural areas, members of the resistance were called the Maquis. The Maquis were known to be ready for anything and eager for vengeance against the Germans. On the 6th of June 1944, the Allied landing in Normandy transformed the situation in occupied France. What had long been a hidden struggle now entered an open and dangerous phase. German commanders feared that resistance networks across the country would rise in support of the advancing Allied armies. Orders were issued to secure communication lines and ensure that reinforcements could move north without interruption. For the Maquis, the landings were the signal they had been waiting for. Their task was clear: disrupt German transport, destroy railway lines, sabotage bridges, and delay troop movements toward the Normandy front. Across southwestern France, resistance groups intensified their operations, targeting infrastructure essential to the German war effort. They understood that every train stopped and every bridge damaged could slow the enemy's response to the invasion. On the morning of the 11th of June 1944, several Maquis groups entered Mussidan in the Dordogne region, a quiet town of just over 2,000 inhabitants. Their objective was to strike the railway bridge over the Ile River and attack German transports moving through the station. When a heavily armed protection train pulled into Mussidan station, a violent clash followed. The train commander was killed, and most of the German personnel guarding the train, including personnel of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, were either killed or wounded. 8 resistance fighters also died in the exchange. The Maquis withdrew into the countryside soon after the attack. The railway had been disrupted, but German forces were already preparing their response. For months, German commanders in occupied France had anticipated precisely this kind of resistance attack. Earlier in 1944, German High Command orders instructed troops to respond immediately with gunfire when attacked by resistance fighters. If civilians were struck while soldiers returned fire, this was to be considered regrettable but unavoidable. Any building from which shots were fired was to be set ablaze without hesitation. German commanders were warned that excessive leniency would endanger their men and would not be tolerated. By early June 1944, directives covering the regions of Dordogne, Lot, and Corrèze demanded the harshest measures to restore order. The population was to be deterred through terror, and communities suspected of sheltering the Maquis were to face collective punishment. These reprisals were not spontaneous acts of anger. They formed part of a calculated strategy, designed to crush resistance support and to demonstrate that any attack on German forces would be answered with swift and merciless force. Violence was not unfamiliar to the soldiers of the 11th Panzer Division. Formed on the 1st of August 1940 as an armored division of the German army, the Wehrmacht, the division saw its first combat during the invasion of Yugoslavia in April 1941. Advancing through Bulgaria, it entered Belgrade and helped secure the capture of the city. The division was then transferred to the Eastern Front, where it became part of Army Group South. It participated in the Battle of Kiev and later took part in the advance toward Moscow. After being encircled in the Korsun-Cherkasy pocket in February 1944 and suffering near destruction during the breakout, the division was withdrawn and redeployed to France. As news of the attack on the German train in Mussidan on the 11th of June 1944 spread, Oberstleutnant Traugott Wilde, commander of the 111th Armored Grenadier Regiment of the German 11th Panzer Division, arrived in Mussidan. He ordered the immediate arrest of hundreds of men from the town and nearby villages. Soldiers moved from house to house, pulling men between the ages of 16 and 60 into the streets at gunpoint. By early afternoon, around 350 men were forced toward the town hall. They were struck with rifle butts, kicked to the ground, and ordered to lie face down with their arms stretched forward and their faces pressed into the dirt. At 4 p.m., men over 60 and those visibly disabled were released. The others were herded into rooms inside the town hall and divided into groups. Identity papers were checked only briefly, and those without documents or suspected of being resistance fighters were marked as terrorists. As evening approached, officers of the SD, the intelligence agency of the SS and the Nazi Party, arrived in Mussidan. They were accompanied by members of the French Carlingue, widely known as the French Gestapo, a criminal organization created by the German Reich Security Main Office to combat the French resistance. Alongside them operated North African auxiliaries of the Brigade Nord-Africaine, acting under German authority in southwestern France. Among the auxiliaries was SS Untersturmführer Alexandre Villaplane, once captain of the French national football team and now commander of a section of the Brigade Nord-Africaine. Born in French Algeria, he was among the first players from North Africa to represent France and captained his country at the 1930 FIFA World Cup. During the Nazi occupation, the former national hero turned to the black market, looted Jewish families, extorted gold merchants, and collaborated with German security services. He took part in raids against suspected resistance supporters and in the arrest of Jews, enriching himself while enforcing German authority. By 1944, the celebrated sportsman had become an SS officer, directing armed auxiliaries in the hunt for enemies of the Third Reich. Shortly before 9 p.m., the SD selected 50 men who were marched under guard to a narrow path about 100 meters from the town hall. They were lined up in 3 rows with their arms raised. German soldiers opened fire at close range, and within seconds, the men were cut down where they stood. 2 of those who had been shot, Marcel Charpentier and Antoine Villechanu, survived despite their wounds. 2 boys among the victims were barely 16 years old. 4 additional men were executed in the streets of Mussidan, including the mayor, Raoul Grassin, and his deputy, Camille Christman. In total, 52 civilians had been killed. The violence did not end with the shootings. German soldiers and auxiliaries, many of them sexual deviants, looted homes and shops and raped women before leaving the town. 115 were deported to concentration camps, from which many never returned. The next day, when the curfew was lifted, the locals discovered the corpses. The Mussidan Massacre was the largest killing of civilians in the Dordogne region and one of the deadliest reprisals in southwestern France during the Nazi occupation. When the Second World War in Europe ended, on the 8th of May, 1945, justice had already caught up with the Wehrmacht soldiers responsible for the Mussidan Massacre. Just 3 months after the massacre, between the 18th and 29th of September 1944, troops of the 11th Panzer Division took part in the Battle of Harrowing. Facing US forces, the Germans suffered heavy losses, with many Wehrmacht soldiers killed and significant amounts of equipment destroyed or captured. The aforementioned Alexandre Villaplane, who according to witnesses was personally involved in the executions during the Mussidan Massacre, was executed by a firing squad in December 1944 on the outskirts of Paris. The leaders of the French Gestapo, Henri Lafont and Pierre Bonny, were executed alongside him. Facing the firing squad, Henri Lafont declared, "For 4 years, I had all the most beautiful women, orchids, champagne, caviar by the bucketful. I lived the equivalent of 10 lives." His words glorified pleasure and excess. They did not speak of the women who were raped or of the 52 civilians murdered in Mussidan. Those lives were not lived 10 times. They were ended in a single evening.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.